First of all, I want to thank very much Archbishop Coakley and also Peter for having invited me to participate in this gathering today. It's really a great thing for me because I got to extend my holiday by a week, but I don't have to call it holiday. I could say it was for business engagement, so it's great to have this. Whenever you think of diplomacy, you don't always think of a priest, nor do you think of the Vatican. In fact, some people like to say that diplomacy comes from the same root as the word duplicity. Well, it doesn't. One of the things that is interesting in the history of our church is the fact that we are the first players, really, in international diplomacy. If you look at the history of the Roman Catholic Church, you all remember that when Constantine decided to leave Rome, he took the court with him and left the Pope behind. And so the Pope decided very early on that he needed to send representatives to the court of Constantine in Constantinople. So he sent what they called apocrisarii, or his emissaries, to represent his point of view, his concerns to the emperor. And it is from that, in the 300s, that we really find the roots of papal diplomacy. We've had formal papal diplomacy in a very institutionalized way for about 400 years, so much so that we opened our own diplomatic academy in 1701 in Rome, which is the oldest diplomatic academy in the world. All of our diplomats study there for at least 2 years. Some study there for 4 years. I was there from 1996 to 1999. And then I was sent to Nigeria, where I served for 3 years, and then was called back to work in the Vatican. So today what I thought I would do, how do you talk about Vatican diplomacy? I thought I would do is try to give you a brief overview of what we do, not only at the home office level in Rome, but also what an ambassador like me, which we call a nuncio, would do on the ground. We have kind of a twofold job, first of all. As a church, I am always a priest first and foremost. And so what we bring to the world before anything else is the love of Jesus Christ. And that's why we're there. We're a constant reminder, oftentimes to people in very secular jobs, that there's something other. And that there's also a moral voice that also needs to be listened to, especially in areas of diplomacy or politics. The other thing that a nuncio does, which is probably the majority of my work, is I spend it with the bishops. The Pope sends you out as his personal representative to the bishops, the local bishops there. So like for instance, I'm actually the nuncio to 5 countries. I have South Africa, Lesotho, Swaziland, Namibia, and Botswana. And so I am constantly with the bishops there, bringing back their hopes and their concerns to the Pope, and also telling them what the Pope's hopes and concerns are for them, and what he would like, where he would like to see the church going. One thing that makes us different, I think, as diplomats from other diplomatic services, is usually in the world of diplomacy, diplomats represent only the concrete interests of their head of state or of their government. And they're there to try to move those interests forward. Ours is kind of the inverse. The Pope sends us out to find out what are the interests, what are the concerns, what are the sufferings, what are the hopes of the local population. Bring it back to him, and then he can do what he can in our little way to try to help. The Pope has a big pulpit, and oftentimes he can use that to bring attention to places that may otherwise never get any attention, or to groups of people who may be even more marginalized or forgotten. And this is why it's so effective and so important to have people on the ground in all different places. I always like to say there are a couple of examples of things that we can do as diplomats. We have a huge network. People don't realize how big Catholicism is. I mean, we're 1.3 billion Catholics in the world right now. And the great part about our work is that many times governments will come to us when they're having trouble finding information about a certain situation, because we may have people on the ground. For example, I was saying the other day, in Aleppo, during all this time with Syria, we've had 2 priests who never left. So if we want information about something, we could go directly to the bishop and then to those priests and get some information back. Another great example, when I was working as the assessor, I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. I was working as the assessor. I had a German ambassador who called once and said, we got a big problem. We have 2 young girls who are missionaries. They got to do some missionary work and they've disappeared in Tanzania. Can you all help us? Our people don't know what to do. We can't find them anywhere. So we were able to call our Nuncio, our ambassador there, who called the local bishop where they were last seen, who then sent out some nuns who were going out into the bush. And about 3 days later, they said, well, yes, they were picked up and they went out and worked in a bush area and they're doing fine. They just don't have any type of communication there. So this is the type of thing that we can, because we have a very good network. The other thing we can do is we can oftentimes give our input to other governments about certain situations on the ground, whether it be during wartime, whether it be political situations. Now, mind you, I like to always say, I'm not saying it's the most objective data. Our people are obviously coming from their own perspective, but we can at least give some information, some help to other governments. That's why so many governments and international organizations have full diplomatic relations with the Holy See. We have 180 now, 181, I take that back, 181 who are present in some way at the Vatican. The Pope recently, in fact, addressed all of them, and there were 100, I think all of them were present almost, of our ambassadors. Vatican diplomacy, I think yesterday, in fact, our head of Vatican diplomacy, our senior diplomat, Cardinal Parolin, he talked about Vatican diplomacy and he used 3 terms. He said we have 3 fundamental things that we need to do. The first is we need to do everything we can to alleviate poverty. Poverty alleviation is number 1. Second is to build bridges, especially in this time when there are so many ruptures in our world. And the third thing we need to do is to build peace. So the things I'm going to present to you today are all related in one way or another to those 3 topics. I think we'll start kind of at the top. First thing, Secretariat of State. I worked at the Secretariat of State for 14 years. Now, the Secretariat of State is kind of like the clearinghouse. It is the main home office for the Pope. It acts as the Pope's personal secretariat in some ways. It also acts as his main interlocutor between churches like Oklahoma City, but also within the Roman Curia, so all the departments of the Roman Curia. For that reason, it's divided into 2 different sections. The first section is called the Section for General Affairs. That's where I worked. I was the number 2 man in the Section for General Affairs. It's called an assessor. Now, I'll tell you a story. When I was named the assessor, I called my mother the day before and said, Mother, I'm being named assessor of the Secretariat of State. There was just a pause. She said, you don't know a damn thing about property taxes. I said, Mother, it's not like the county assessor. I'm not doing anything like that. So what the assessor did, his real job, was that he acts as the first place where everything passes through. Most of the correspondence that's sent to the Holy Father will be assigned by the assessor, the responses. He has a juridical function, and he acts kind of like a chancellor of a diocese, but he acts in that dimension, or in that way, for the Roman Curia. He also, on a government level, has a governmental position. In the European model, he would be like the Deputy Minister of the Interior. In an American model, it would be a combination between the Deputy Chief of Staff and the Deputy National Security Advisor. So I did that job for 7 years. That job was very much involved with relating to our ambassadors, but also with relating to the whole Roman Curia, and especially to bishops. I got to know bishops from all over the world because the Secretary of State, as I said, is one of the main interlocutors with the local bishops. The other thing we have is I think that in Rome especially, and being placed in Rome with so many diplomatic entities there, whether they be the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Administration, or whether they be, for instance, the Roman Diplomatic Corps to Italy, plus our own diplomatic corps. It was a place that had a very global and international perspective. I think very few other diplomatic stations can compare to it in the world because of the amount of information and activity that takes place in the Roman setting. One of the things that was important and remains important in papal diplomacy, and you hear this often, I think especially during this time of Pope Francis, is that the Holy See continues to act as a moral voice in the world. That's what I was pointing to at the beginning. That's why it's important that we have this presence internationally. We remind people that there's more than just pragmatism at times, that there's also morality. And we have to always look to the higher value and make sure that we listen to the moral voice as well. One of the major things where you see our activity increasing, especially during Pope Francis, is in the level of mediation. We have been called and asked to mediate many different high-level things. Now, one of the things about Vatican diplomacy, and I mean, I'm telling you all about it, but how many of you even knew that the Vatican had a diplomatic service? Some people. A lot of people have no idea. I didn't know it growing up as a kid in Guthrie, Oklahoma. I really didn't care about it much. But it does, and part of it is we remain very much behind the scenes. But I think the fact that we do remain behind the scenes gives us the ability to interact in a way that other governments can't. We try to stay away from megaphone diplomacy. We don't like these things too much when people are always in the press and on the media before we've even started to work diplomatically together. And this is why the Holy See, I think, is still involved with lots of mediation, with lots of dialogue. You have examples like Venezuela at this very moment, the Colombian peace agreement, the agreement between the United States and Cuba. The Holy See was involved in all of these. I think our diplomatic service is also useful because it interacts, because we're a global reality. We're a global reality that covers every culture practically, every language group. Therefore, we offer a very international and global view to the global community, but in a different way. And I think possibly it's because we don't have any commercial interests. So much of diplomacy today, as you may know, is based on commercial interests. We don't have any of that. And in some ways, that makes us very enigmatic to many governments. And I think that's probably one of our greatest contributions, too, because we don't have that interest. So when we are called into a situation, we can talk about generalities, and that's where I think why we are so much involved in multilateral work. The multilateral, and if you don't know what multilateral is many governments in relationship with many governments. Bilateral would be one government to another government. We're involved in both. People sometimes don't understand maybe what our role is at the United Nations. We don't vote. We act as an official observer, but we always have a voice. And we try to remind the global community in a general level of those things which touch people's lives on a daily basis. I thought I would also talk to you about a little bit about our bilateral work, so to give you an idea about what my work would be diplomatically. The specific issues that we're interested in this time would first of all be, for instance, global justice and peace issues. Now in Southern Africa, this is very important. We have lots of problems, lots of tension right now, political tension, not so much in South Africa, but like, for instance, if you watch the news, you wouldn't probably know a little country like Lesotho, but Lesotho has had a lot of tension over the last number of years. And so we have tried to help bring about a sense, there's a lot of Catholics there too, it's probably the most Catholic area. So we've tried to help and bring out some reconciliation and some dialogue between the differing groups there. Pope Francis, as you know, is very concerned about peace right now. I think we should all be concerned about it. He's described on many occasions what's going on right now as a third world war in pieces. I don't know that we've really had in the last number of years so much conflict in so many areas. And we all have a responsibility, and especially the church, to do anything it can to try to build peace in those areas. Another thing that we are very worried about is the whole idea of migrants and workers. And one of the reasons we're so worried about it is, it's one of the first consequences of war. Anytime there's a war, people flee. And they flee quickly, and they leave everything behind. And as is always the case, the first who are affected by this are the already incredibly poor, those who are already very impoverished, and especially women and children. And so that is one of the major reasons we are putting such a huge focus on migrants and workers, both internationally, but also locally. Even in my own area, we have a problem. As you know, Zimbabwe has had turmoil for many, many years, and all of these countries are just overflowing right now with people who are trying to escape or trying to find work. So how you deal with this justly, deal with this humanely, deal with it compassionately, but also in a way that can be handled by the receiving governments is something that has to be done very carefully. Another thing that we help a lot of is with international charity. Now, I know you know our Archbishop used to be with Catholic Relief Services. We do a lot with Caritas Internationalis. Catholic Relief is part of the Caritas family. Caritas Internationalis is the great umbrella of all the Catholic charitable works on national bases throughout the world. We're very, very active in Southern Africa because we have so many problems there. And they offer not only expertise and assistance, but also financial assistance that comes both from the international community and from the Holy See. One of the major concerns that I've had since I've been there is the whole health care and faith-based care that is going on in Southern Africa. As you know, HIV/AIDS, it caused havoc in the area. It almost undermined even social and governmental systems. It was so bad. We're still running at almost 25% infection rates in all of those countries. People don't realize that. Because now we can handle it because the antiretrovirals are very available. But the number of women, and especially young women who are infected, is rising dramatically. And this is something that must constantly be brought to the attention of the international community to make sure that they continue to have the tools, especially for prevention, to fight this and to educate, especially young women, about what's happening. I was recently at the HIV/AIDS Catholic International Conference, which was held in Durban before the summit for HIV/AIDS. I found it remarkable to think that the Catholic Church still treats 1 in 4 HIV/AIDS patients in the world. 1 in 4. We used to do almost 50%. Now government is moving in more and offering more assistance, but it's still 25% of people are treated by the Catholic Church. I was also very much touched by the fact that we tend not to really realize who the most affected by HIV/AIDS is from our Western perspective. The real people who are affected by this are poor black women. They're the majority of the victims in Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa. And I think this is something that we also need to be very aware of. One of the most, even from a personal experience, one of the most touching and also disturbing things is that I have not to this day met, especially an indigenous person in Southern Africa who has not lost at least one family member from HIV/AIDS. So we should, I think, realize this is not, it's so easy to make it a sterile or septic thing, HIV/AIDS. But this is something that still touches people on a daily level in places like Southern Africa. So something I think we should always keep in our mind. Another very important area that I work a lot on is interreligious dialogue. Interreligious dialogue is very important in Southern Africa. We have a very large Jewish community, first of all, very large. We also have a very large Hindu community and a very large Muslim community. as well as ecumenically we have the other Christian faiths, especially the Dutch Reformed Church, which is similar to the Presbyterian Church, and you also have the Anglican Church. So we keep up a very close relationship with them. I attend a lot of meetings and constantly doing what we can as people of faith to promote dialogue, understanding, and especially in some ways to try to promote peace. Another very important issue right now, and you all know about this, is human trafficking. Human trafficking remains a major problem in the area. We're working with government and especially with social agencies and with religions to do what we can to curb that. There are many elements involved. A lot of it has to do with poverty. A lot of it has to do with lack of education. So we're trying to educate people and then trying to weed out these elements that continue to traffic in human beings, whether it be children soldiers or whether it be for prostitution. And then finally, and there's many other areas I could talk about. One of the major elements of concern is the environment. And you've heard that, the Pope Francis wrote an entire encyclical on this, Laudato Si. Now, some people say, well, I don't know if I agree with all that. I think the point is this. The Pope refers to, again and again, to the environment and to our earth in his talk as our common home. I always like to say it this way. When you're a priest, there's nothing worse than being transferred to a rectory that hasn't been taken care of for 25 years. They had 16 dogs, 2 cats, no housekeeper, and father who thought he was a cook but didn't like to clean the kitchen. Well, we don't want to leave our home this for the next generations. We all have a responsibility to do what we can to keep what God has given us pristine. Having lived in Africa on 2 different occasions now, it is devastating when you see what has been done in some areas, especially where I am right now because of the strip mining, because there's so much there, gold, platinum, diamonds. When you see what they left behind or didn't leave behind, it's incredible. And it has made it very difficult for the local populace. They don't have the resources to rebuild the way that we may. They can't do a big cleanup if there's an Exxon spill. They just don't have the resources. The same is true, I think, in places like Nigeria. I mean, I know when I was in Nigeria, I was in the Delta region many times. What was left behind, we're in a petroleum club here, what happened with some of those industries there when they went in to take the petroleum out? Because there isn't any kind of a framework there in place, they could really do what they want. It is embarrassing. It's embarrassing. And it has left people in dire situations who are already poor. I think it's getting better, but we can always do more. And our job there is to do what we can with local government, not only to find clean ways of producing electricity or to find better ways of finding fossil fuels, but make sure that our environment is left well and that whatever we do is sustainable. Sustainability is really a huge thing today. At this point, I don't have much else. I think what I would like to do is open up for a few questions. How much time do we have? 5 minutes or something? So if I can open, if anybody have a question, I'll be glad to take a question from the floor. Yes, sir.
I would like to ask about evangelization.
Yes.
Things that I've read, one of the biggest concerns is Muslim faith spreading very rapidly. And I think that's very important.
Sure. There is yes, I will repeat the question. He said about evangelization and that he has heard that the Muslim faith is spreading very rapidly throughout Africa. And what is my perspective on that? First of all, there is a very large Muslim presence in Africa and has been traditionally, obviously, since before the end of the last millennia, 2 millennia ago. The thing is that there is some spread in the areas. I think, for instance, in a place like Nigeria, it's always been said that they're predominantly Muslim. That's not true. It's predominantly Christian. Islam, though, there were elements of Islam that were coming from other places that have been used, especially money and resources to build mosques and to build Islamic centers. Those have been the source of some radicalization and problems. Western Africa is a different reality than Southern Africa. Southern Africa has always had somewhat of a Muslim population, but not an extremely large one. It is growing, though. There are, for industry and other reasons, there have been more and more Muslims that are moving in. And there is concern on the part of, some on the part of government, some on the part of other agencies, that there could be radicalized elements that are coming in. I think as a community of faith, we have to be aware of this. I think we have to be realistic. But I also think we can never give up, as our Pope says this all the time, we can never give up on trying to engage. Levels of engagement where possible. Now sometimes it is difficult, but we can't ever give up because we are Jesus Christ here on earth, and we have to do what we can to reach out and to try to build bridges. That's where building bridges comes in again, and see if we can find some kind of common denominators. I worked with these issues for many years when I was assessor. And one of the things that I found with certain communities is oftentimes we may not be able to talk about theological concepts because we're so far apart. But what we can talk about is very practical things, like children, like education, like healthcare. And we can start building bridges on those areas, hoping to move on to maybe more philosophical discussions later. But I did find that that was very, very easy when you got to on a pragmatic level of dialogue. So, yes, sir.
So, Archbishop, you worked with 3 different popes.
Yes.
Wondering about what it's like to work with their different styles. John Paul II.
Yes. When I was with John Paul, I came at the very end of John Paul II's reign, and by then he was already not well. And so we had a very limited, at that time the work was a little different because it was at the end of the pontificate. Pope Benedict I worked much more closely with. I traveled with him on many apostolic voyages. One thing I always loved about Pope Benedict is his humility. He was incredibly humble. A lot of people thought he was shy. I never saw that. I don't think he's shy at all. The thing is, he's professorial. And he listens. And he would always allow people to speak first and listen very intently, and then offer his point of views after he had heard everyone else. And usually just sharp as that, bang, 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 bang. But I found it's more of, I think, kind of that style that you find from a really good teacher. And that's what I always appreciated about Pope Benedict. His kindness is extraordinary. Pope Francis has been fantastic, as you know. He started day one and he never let up. It was a whirlwind of activity, and it still is. And the man's 80 years old now. But he knows he wants to do a certain amount of things in a short amount of time, he thinks. So he works very hard. One of the things you really found with Pope Francis was his personal touch. It would not be unusual for him personally to say, we need to do this, this, and this, or to call you and say, do you know anything about this? Have you seen? I mean, he's very much involved, hands-on. And as you all know, his simplicity. You couldn't ask for a simpler man. What you see is what you get with Pope Francis. That's just exactly what it is. It's what you see is what he was always that way when he was in Buenos Aires, and he's not changing just because he's in the Vatican. So it was very refreshing, actually.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.